So we're going to actually continue with a very similar format. We're going to do a fireside chat, a panel conversation, a few closing remarks, and then a reception. And because this is brain and mental health, of course, there will be, should you so choose, some adult beverages. Because a glass of red wine is never wrong, right? And I do also encourage you, after we have completed the formal portion and moved to the reception, do visit the tables. I thought it was great that the Easter Seals and Cohen Clinics have their stress balls in the shape of a brain. I might be using that in the next little conversation. And also, there are copies of an amazing book called Decluttered, free for anybody to pick up at their station. Because certainly, I don't know about you, but having a clutter-free brain, a clutter-free home, and an office, man, doesn't it just make you breathe a little bit easier? It does me, although I will tell you that none of those three items are clutter-free at this point in my life, but I'm hoping for that. So do pick those up and other items and say hello and thank these folks that have taken the time to drag in the rain their materials and share them with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, although I've lost her. Oh, there she is. I'm like, where? You're hiding. Yes. I'm like, I see her name tag is at her empty chair. And I'm like, I don't want to introduce the person that's maybe not here. So Amy Gilliland. She is the president of General Dynamics Information Technology, or GDIT for short, and is recognized as an innovative leader in the technology industry. Prior to joining GDIT, one of General Dynamics' largest business units with more than 28,000 employees, she's held leadership roles at General Dynamics, including positions in human resources, strategy, and investor relations. She's an advocate for workplace mental health, and her leadership has been defined by her belief that compassion and performance can coexist. I think that's amazing because sometimes we will bend one to get to the other. In 2021, under Amy's leadership, GDIT launched its How Are You Really? Mental health campaign to encourage meaningful conversations about the challenges employees face and increase awareness of the resources that are available for support. The campaign and GDIT's commitment to workplace mental health has been recognized by mental health advocates and associations. Amy understands the critical need for a resilient workforce to support increasingly complex government agency missions, and she has worked to eliminate the stigma often associated with seeking mental health that exists within the intelligence and the veteran populations. Before General Dynamics, Amy served in the United States Navy as a surface warfare officer on a destroyer, and later as a liaison to the U.S. House of Representatives and a public affairs officer. She earned a bachelor's degree from an institution not far from here, one that many have probably never heard of. It's called the U.S. Naval Academy. And a master's degree from Cambridge University, as well as a master's degree in business administration from Georgetown. Without further ado, Amy Gilliland, please join me. I've been fangirling her on LinkedIn for months and months. So the fact of seeing her, and every time I see any woman that is currently serving or is a veteran on LinkedIn, especially in a leadership role, I connect. As soon as they accept, I message them and say, hey, are you familiar with the Military Women's Memorial? Is your story in our database?
I can attest that's true.
It is. I do it to her all the time. So I want to know from a leadership role in this behemoth, General Dynamics, GDIT, what made you decide that mental health for you and your team was important enough to make it a formalized program?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, thank you for having me and for what you do and for what this represents. so moved by the presentation before, and I'm so glad to hear that I'm not the only one that's being told I'm getting older. So sympathy, misery loves company for sure. And thank you all for making time to come out. So GDIT is 28,000 employees all over the world. And in the course of COVID, we had a glimpse into the souls of our employees in ways that we hadn't before. So for all the horrific things that COVID brought to all of us, we got to see our employees, and they were struggling, and it was clear they were struggling. You could measure that in any of a variety of ways. People lost so much in COVID. They lost caregivers, they lost loved ones, they lost their jobs, they lost economic income, they lost babies, they lost all the things that normally happen, but happened in COVID. And so we were seeing our employees struggle, and it was clear that we needed to do something. And then I was taking a long weekend at Lake Anna, and I had a call from one of my senior leaders, and it said that we had just lost an employee to suicide, and a very senior employee at that, and nobody knew something was wrong. And I think that I had seen in my own personal life some suicide sort of tangentially to my life. And so it was becoming clear to me that this was very prevalent and perhaps exacerbated by what COVID was bringing on. And I decided right then that as an employer, we need to be part of the solution for that. We can't just be someplace where people come and transact. We need to help this problem. And so that's where we launched the campaign that you talked about.
Did you name it?
So I did not personally name it, but what I did do was come back and talk to my team, and I told them, I am serious about this. This isn't an email that a president sends on one Monday and never follows up on. This is something that we are going to talk about for a long time, because this is an epidemic now, and it's going to be with us for decades. It's not just our employees, it's their children who are remote learning, and we can talk about all the statistics around depression and anxiety in the younger population, but this is something I'm committed to, and I want to name it appropriately. I want this to be something that employees understand just by its name. And anyways, I have a great team on the internal comm side, and one of my 20-something-year-olds, it really resonated with her, and she came up with this idea. And it's really about all those water cooler conversations that you have, or like, hey, how was your weekend? How you doing? How are you? And you don't even look them in the eyes. You're getting your coffee, thinking about whatever's next in your day. Nobody really hangs out to find out that. And so that's how it resonated with her, and it's really caught on.
Yeah, so I like the how are you really? Because you're right, in the business, well, in life, don't we walk by somebody and we're like, hi, how are you? Don't tell me anything. I'm moving, right? But to take the time and put the really at the end and say, no, how are you really? I mean, I have some colleagues that I work with or interact with that flat affect. Hi, how are you today? I'm fine. No, you're not. Let's go get a cup of tea. Let's sit down and let's have a conversation. You never know whether that is the conversation that saves a life. And to your point, if all you do is save one person, right, then your whole life is worth it. And I think that's exactly, and you have 28,000. I don't even have 28 employees that manage this whole place. But I know my people, and and we know each other well enough that we know when somebody's having a bad day.
And I think even beyond the mental health part of it, I think COVID also taught us that we're reflecting on our lives and why are we doing what we're doing, and we're spending all those hours of our days with other people. We want to be someplace where we're part of a community, where we think people actually care about us. And so I think it's part of building that kind of a company too.
Yeah, and that's hard to do, but as you break out within your branches and sub-departments and so forth, I know that initially, I don't know about you guys, but my team and we didn't know how to spell Zoom before COVID happened, right? Or Teams and all of these great platforms, WebEx, you add them all up. But initially, some of our team members that they did come to our group meetings so we could just check on each other while we were all being forced to remote. They kept their camera off. And finally, I put my foot down. I said, you're going to turn the camera on. Well, my hair looks, we don't care. I want to see your face. And that's when we started seeing some of that pain and pressure that was just bottled up and needed. And so sometimes there'd be private chats within there where somebody would go, hey, girl, we need to talk. We need to, I'm going to call you right after this meeting. We're going to talk. And one girl, this was, think about the George Floyd summer. Right? We were talking about that earlier. One of our staff members was African American, and her sister had just been pulled over by the cops here in DC that morning, and they had pulled her out of the car. She was not fit to be on a group meeting that afternoon. I mean, tears, as soon as we said, how's everybody doing? We went, take it off mute and talk for a minute. I mean, as soon as that happened, the tears just started running. Does that happen to you?
We had the same experience. And in fact, our employee resource groups were really, quite honestly, born out of George Floyd. And it was a way for employees to find community at work and to be able to talk about things and present perspectives of how they were feeling. You don't want to analogize anything, but not too long after that, we had our Asians in Motion employee resource groups. You had some pretty violent attacks against Asians, and some of our Asian employees were feeling the same, similar kinds of things. Those perspectives are, first of all, they wanted a place to just be able to talk, because remember COVID, when the only people you saw were either yourself or, in my case, a lot of my children. Right, that alone will make you crazy. I love them, but in any event, it was very isolating, and all of that builds up. So we have leveraged, actually, I mean, I wish none of those things happened, but it was a foundation that we are building community on, and our company is so much better for it.
So when you say your company is so much better for it, do you think, even through all the trials and tribulations, and God knows we never want to go through that again, but the lessons learned have to be turned into, turn that piece of sand that gets into the oyster and turns into a pearl? Is that how you kind of think this has happened now?
Yeah, no, we have, it's interesting just in the totality of mental health and the evolution of what it means to be a leader at work. That conversation is 100 times better today than it was 5 years ago, because that empathy and compassionate leadership, look, the day after COVID, when we realized that we were in this for a while, and it became real when the NHL shut down, I think, and there's going to be no more hockey games. It was like, okay, when that became clear, our leaders needed to help those that they were leading in ways that they never anticipated. And you don't leave that behind in COVID. That becomes a new way of leading, a way where you still hold people accountable, but you look into their lives and you ask them about the totality of them. And so I think that for the better, we have become more flexible. We have benefits that are more receptive to meeting employees where they are. We have trained our leaders to be leaders in 2024, and that's different than what it was to be a leader in 2019. How to have hard conversations, how to ask, how are you really? And all those things are different from before in such a better way.
I think so too. I know in the earlier panel, they talked about their transition, where they feel sort of a disconnect when you transition out of the military into civilian life. And so can you talk a little bit about what your transition was like, and was it smooth and seamless and no bumps in the road, or how did it go for you?
No. No, I really resonated with what the panel said before, that sense of belonging and security. That was all I'd known since I'd been at that other school up that's nearby here, the Naval Academy one. And so it was General Dynamics was a place that had a value system that aligned with mine, and that was important. And I knew that I was in the right place, but I didn't understand how my experience conveyed. And so it was a super difficult time for me just to find my footing and to feel that the anxiety that comes with that kind of transition. You don't know what your next job is. You don't know if you're going to be successful. You don't understand the language. You don't understand the benefits program. None of it makes sense. And so actually, we have conveyed that. I know there was some discussion before about just transitioning. In our industry, the attrition rate for first-year military hires is 40%. That is a lot of individuals who have served their country and have had a experience that is troubling at best and painful at worst. And so we started a program at GDIT last year which really acknowledges that transition and the bumpiness of that transition. And so sort of how do we get military veterans inside the company, and how do we help them acclimate? How do we explain the jargon that is business speak? How do we then, once they're settled, how do we help them gain the skills that they need to be successful? And then how do we help them thrive? So it's a three-part approach, and we are using, in part, the veterans that have been successful to contribute to that, because there's nobody that understands you better than a fellow veteran. And so we've had about 600 veterans go through that program, and we have a 95% retention rate there. So I think leaning into those programs where you can help veterans, and they are over 30% of my workforce. They were a 35% of our hires last year, and we hire 7,000 people a year on average at GIT. Veterans, there's nobody like a veteran that understands the mission. So no better way to serve the mission than to bring the mission to the mission. And so they're a huge part of our workforce, and we want them to be successful. We had an event last week. It was around financial, mental, and physical well-being for our veterans. And it was sponsored by our Honor Employee Resource Group, so a group that was founded, again, in part in building community. And that is in part co-led by a retired two-star general, Army general that works with us. And, he has talked openly, going back to the mental health thing, he's talked openly about his own struggles with mental health and how he has accessed resources. And so having veterans talk openly about how they've accessed company resources and how those resources has helped them navigate is so important. So we are really focused on making sure that veterans can have a second career where they feel like they can continue to contribute, because I find that veterans that come to the aerospace and defense industry after the service, they miss the mission. They want to be a part of it still, but just in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier, I think you had mentioned, or previously, about mental health being a national security imperative.
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Yeah. So quite simply, what we do at GDIT is we serve all major federal agencies, so intelligence, federal and civilian agencies, and then also in the Defense Department, so across the government, and we deliver cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. We serve the Traumatic Brain Injury Center here, the captain in the audience, and so a whole variety of missions that are so important. And my simplistic way of thinking about the gravity of what we do, we have employees serving all over the world. I just got back from South Korea. We were talking about that. If my employees are not mentally healthy, they cannot serve the mission. They think they can serve the mission, but actually they don't bring their best selves to work. And so actually, and we all come from, and they were saying it in the panel before, and I couldn't agree more, in the military, we were taught, like, you're okay. It's sort of like growing up in my house. Unless you had a broken bone, you were going to school, right? In the military, same kind of thing. We are taught to just intrinsically to not complain, to not be the person that's going to detract from, or, we don't want to make somebody else have to stand our watch, for instance, right? That's how we're brought up. So 30% of my workforce are veterans that are grown up that way. And then I have 14,000 of my 28,000 employees that have security clearances that are top secret or higher. Nobody with a security clearance wants to lose it, because that is also, when we go back to our concerns as veterans, that's job security. And so what we were finding is that our veterans and those who are holding clearances, the stigma associated with getting access to what you need, they believe that they would lose their clearances. They would believe that, somebody would pass judgment on them because they weren't okay. And so they'd rather go along their way and not share that. And so in my mind, if we can serve the mental, physical, and financial well-being of our employees, then they can serve our customers, who are the mission. And so it's a couple degrees of separation that you have to get through. But really, I do believe it's a national security imperative that our employees who are serving these missions, oftentimes right alongside the warfighters that are there, they need to be their best selves.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And as an intel soldier with that top secret plus kind of thing, it never even would have occurred to me to seek mental health services, even if I had needed them. And I'm sure I would have had I thought about it, to be honest with you, But it's, to your point, I heard it earlier, suck it up, Cupcake. You'll be fine. Keep driving on. There's a mission to be had. What advice would you have for leaders that are in their organizations? How do you start having those mental health discussions and conversations and make it okay to not be okay?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you have to be committed to it. This isn't a one-day wonder kind of message, and it takes a while. It took decades for career military officers to have that stigma, and it's going to take a while for that stigma to go away. So I think first and foremost, you just have to be committed to it. And you have to bring your leaders along with you. And so a big piece for us, actually, this was really freeing for my leaders too, because it was okay for them not to be okay. And so, as leaders, we are often taking on a lot. And so then we become the person that's bottling it all up. And so we made it okay. I made it okay for my leaders to talk about how they have done it. And people ask me if they were reluctant to do so. Actually, quite the opposite. They were so emboldened that they could talk about their own struggles and things that were going on in their life in different ways. And so first and foremost, I would say be committed. Secondly, be committed for a long time. And then last, you really have to bring your leadership along with you, because they're on the deck plates every day. They're the ones that have to start their meetings with, how are you really? Tell me something bad that happened over the weekend. Tell me something that's on your mind. It is those deck plate leadership kind of moments that will really carry this forward. And I'll tell you, I travel all over the world to see my employees, and there is not a time, there's not a place I go where I don't have somebody pull me aside and tell me personally how much they appreciate it. And so I think, going back to your question, being vulnerable as leaders and bringing that compassion and creating a workplace where you expect leaders to be that way. And, everybody has a different leadership style. I'm not saying everybody has to be the touchy-feely type, but you can create an expectation that says you need to know and check in on the people that work for you. And if that's not the kind of leader you are, it's not the kind of company that this isn't a good place for you, because we expect our leaders to take care of our people and help them thrive.
Last question. In the military, you know how we are, we want to start our meetings exactly on time. And if we've got a run of show, we're like sticklers for exactly when. How do you encourage across the organization that when you actually ask somebody, how are you really? And now somebody is ready to pour out a little bit of the I'm not okay conversation, that it's okay to take that break, that pause, and have a real conversation, not like, hey, can I get back to you on that? How do you empower, as an organization of 28,000, to take the time to really hear your people?
No, it's a great question. I would tell you, first and foremost, what we have done is we have helped people figure out how to have those conversations. Because if you rewind the clock 4 years ago, mental health has got a stigma just in and of itself. It's not something that people want to talk about freely. And I'm glad that we're talking about it more as a society. And I'm glad that workplaces are engaging. And part of the reason why I'm here with you is because I love the opportunity to continue spreading this word. But we have to help leaders know how to have those conversations, because I don't actually believe people aren't having those conversations because they're rushed and they've got to get to their next meeting. I think our leaders, make good decisions in that, but I think that they shy away from those conversations because it's awkward and it's hard and they don't want to have that conversation. It's like a career conversation. Like those are, they're hard. They take effort. And so we've put playbooks out. We have a whole set of resources on our intranet and also on GDIT's website. If anybody is looking to replicate it in your own organization, give us a call. We'd be happy to spread the materials out. It's a whole established campaign, but where people can go and download as a manager or just as a colleague or a peer, how can I ask somebody without being offensive, because this could be perceived as crossing, a line. And we've done it. I think the other way that I would encourage is we have brought other people in to speak about it. So, for instance, there have been statistics reported recently about just the prevalence of anxiety and depression and isolation in our younger employees, so our early career population. Many of these employees started their first jobs in COVID at home in maybe their childhood bedrooms, and they have not been in the workplace before. And they don't want to turn their cameras on because they're terrified of what that means, right? There's a lot of things that contribute to this. And we brought in a speaker in January, shortly after the data came out about the early career employees, and tackled it head on. It broke the internet at GDIT. We had thousands of our young early career employees come. And so we just made it a topic that you could come to. And I think sometimes just being in a place where other people are talking about it, and I think you get that through leadership. Harvard just published a study actually that said the number one thing that will get an employee to talk about a need or to access mental health resources is to hear another employee talking about it. And so we're just trying to create those moments through communities, through our ERGs, like we said, the Black Employee Network, through our Asians in Motion Network, any kind of deliberate, because you do have to be very deliberate now in a hybrid work policy where people are going 100 miles an hour, but to create opportunities for people to share and to create an expectation of compassion and leadership. That's a privilege.
Well, Jan, I love working for you, but if I wasn't working for you, I'd be working right over here with her. I love what you're doing, and thank you, because you bring that true, excitement to this topic, that it's not a taboo. It's not, oh, put it over in the corner, we're not going to discuss this. So thank you for what you do for GDIT and for coming to us to share this.
I appreciate it. And thank you all for making the time, because going back to the national security, we all love the military and what it is doing for our country. Otherwise, we wouldn't be a part of this organization. And we're fighting to keep people in service of national security. And so making sure that we can take care of folks and that they know that only in 0.0000001% of cases would you lose your clearance, and that there's resources there and that companies genuinely care. So I just wanted to ask you, how are you really?
And look at her. She's making the great eye contact and everything. When we did our Zoom meeting in advance, we were talking about the COVID and everything. And normally I'm pretty good about all of this, but for some reason, I shared with her that just over 2 years ago, my baby brother, died in COVID. And I was not okay. But I had to come to work, I had to lead, and you suck it up and you cry in the shower and you do whatever you have to do. And I think that had somebody at that point said, how are you really? I would have been more than willing to say, I'm screwed up. My baby brother, younger than me, should not have been buried before my parents. It was killing me. But I was trying to be the strong person for the team, right? And so I think what you're doing is amazing. And what we want to implement here at the Women's Memorial is exactly that.
I'm so sorry for your loss. I know I was touched by that. And I've had so many of these instances where employees in trailers in Iraq will, or in Kuwait or other places, will come up and tell me things like this. So, and I know that the campaign is working. I got an email from an employee on Friday that says, Amy, you often ask us, but as a leader, I know it's lonely. And I just wanted to see on this Memorial Day weekend, how are you really? So we have lots of resources. We'd be happy to give them to you. It's, you can implement them here and to anybody else in the audience. But thank you for your leadership and again for the opportunity to be here and talk about such an important topic.
You can't get off the stage without me asking it right back to you. How are you really?
I'm a hot mess. It's the last 3 weeks of school. I'm not sure I'm going to make it.
You'll make it. We all do.
Okay. All right.
But
Well,
thank you so much for being here. How about a round of applause for Amy Jill? We are moving on to our panel discussion while we do the chair change out quickly. See, this is why I don't wear the heels. She's already gotten a Charlie horse today. I love it. I love it. So Patty, our next panel moderator, is the CEO of Black Feather Foundation, which is a partner organization of the Moral Compass Federation. For the past 17 years, Patty has focused on advocating for U.S. military veterans, their families, and caregivers. Her commitment to this cause stems from her personal experiences as a caregiver for her husband, a military veteran wounded in war, awarded the Purple Heart. This role has instilled in her the values of strength, courage, and resilience. Since 2007, she has been at the forefront of supporting military families, having founded local networks dedicated to their needs and volunteering with organizations that aid veterans transitioning to civilian life. So without further ado, I'm turning quickly. There she is. Hi, Patty. Come on up.
There we go. Okay, thank you so much for having me. First of all, it is such a privilege to be here. I cannot tell you my journey since 2007, and it is amazing to see such great resources that are out there, such as Moral Compass Federation and many of you. And what a hard act to follow after Dr. Kelly. Your panel was fantastic, so thank you. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our team, but first starting with Captain Carlos Williams. Would you please come on up? Come on down, I should say. Thank you. So I do need to give a shout out, I was told, to Brigadier General Tahan. Thank you so much for coming. She is with the Defense Capital Region, so thank you. Captain Carlos D. Williams is a native of Albany, Georgia. He is the director of the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, otherwise known as NICO. He is an active duty naval officer currently serving as the director of the National Intrepid Center of Excellence at Walter Reed National Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Williams is the past director of the Office of Global Health Engagement for the Department of the Navy, where he served as the primary advisor on the global health matters. During his tenure, he designated and implemented the Navy Global Health Specialist Program and is the architect of the Integrated Trauma and Medical Readiness Exchange to support readiness of the operational forces. He has a large resume, actually. I'm going to let him take over because it is a whole lot of military jargon, which being a military spouse for a long time, I get it, but he's going to be a lot better at this part.
Yeah, no worries. And we kind of gamed this beforehand. So I said, get to a certain point and just let me have it. And then I'm going to ask everyone to actually just read it. I think it'll make it easier if you read through it. You can see it if you care. But I would tell you something that's funny. This morning I got up and my wife said, what are you getting dressed up for? I said, well, on the schedule that we have in my kitchen, I put a TV screen up and it's a checklist. So we have a checklist about everything that needs to be done. She said, I saw in there you're going to be on a panel discussion. She said, you better be the only man on that panel. Because if you are a bunch of men on a panel, we call that mantle panning. And so I learned a new word today. And so I want everybody to report back to her that I was the only guy on the panel. And she's in public health policy. She does discussions all the time, and her issues are around substance abuse. And so she does a lot of policy on that. So I have to make sure that I am speaking what I know today and be quiet what I don't. So with that said, I'm going to bring up the rest of my team here who are the experts. Okay, so I want to make sure that they're here with me. And we talk about NICO. We talk about what we do in the Department of Defense in the National Capital Region, as well as throughout DHA. Okay, I want to ask Dr. Wise to come up. Dr. Michelle Wise is nurse practitioner, doctor of nurse practitioner at National Intrepid Center of Excellence there in Bethesda. She is a Navy veteran, and so she brings a wealth of knowledge to the organization, and I'm happy to have her here today. So thank you, ma'am. And I want to bring up Dr. Christine Brady. Dr. Brady is a Psych D, so be very careful what you say here. Okay, she is a neuropsych, not just a psychologist, but a neuropsychologist, right? So there's a lot of analyzation that's going on here. But she is at Fort Belvoir. She's at ATAMC, but at ISC Fort Belvoir there. So she is director of ISC Fort Belvoir and a lieutenant commander in the United States Public Health Service Corps. So, and by the way, she does have pedigree in the Navy as well. She was Navy prior to being Public Health Service Corps. So thank you, and thank you. And then I want to bring up, last but not least, Dr. Chandler Rhodes. So Dr. Rhodes is our service chief for treatment and rehabilitation at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. And she actually is instrumental in helping run all network, and when I say network, it means all of the traumatic brain injury centers across the DHA, which I'll talk a little bit about, NICO and the Defense Intrepid Network, the research programs and protocols across our organization. One of the reasons that NICO was started, I'll talk a little bit more, is based on research, understanding traumatic brain injury and brain health. And that's one of the reasons that Congress stood us up in 2010. So again, with myself, my background, again, I am an internal medicine pediatrician. So I saw that as well. We have another med-peds doc in the audience as well. It's very few of us. We try to stick together. And I have done most of my career in the international space. And so I was a U.S. Health Attaché 4 years in the South Pacific. It was a hard task, and it was in Fiji and Papua New Guinea, so that was a hard job. And then I spent another 4 years in Africa, starting out in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, so in East Africa, and then I moved over to West Africa. That was running a USAID and DoD program when they first stood up AFRICOM back in 2008. And then the Navy asked me to come back and run the Navy's Office for Global Health Engagement and start the first program that we had in the Navy for training medical providers, medical officers on how to be global health engagers, so in that parallel attaché space. And then I had the pleasure of going to Capitol Hill for 2 years as a fellow with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And that was a life-changing experience for me. And along the way, I met some amazing people. Presidential Leadership Scholar, Amy's in the audience there, and some others have gone down that road with me. So I want to thank you for that. But that is my background. The only fun fact that I always do a fun fact when during introductions, by the way, it's I do search and rescue with my dogs. I have 2 dogs I do search and rescue with. And the funniest thing, my team is mostly all women on my search and rescue team here in one of 5 teams in Maryland. And whenever we take our team picture, I'm one of the few men on the team, but I'm also the only poodle on the team. So I have a I have a 80-pound standard poodle that is nationally certified to search and rescue, and I always make sure he gets the pretty cut whenever we do team pictures. So.
Thank you. I told you it was a lot. He's amazing. So I would like to go ahead and give you ladies a little chance to talk as well about what it is that you do specifically for NICO.
Oh, there we go. It helps if it's turned on. So NICO has been absolutely a pleasure to work at. I have spent 20 years in medicine, and I don't feel like I've ever done as much good as I have here at NICO. We touch people on such an amazing level. I have patients that have been in from like months to like 20 years, 30 years, and they're like, I have received the best care that I have in my entire life here at NICO. We do our IOP, intensive outpatient program. I focus on the outpatient program. I love that we're seeing the younger soldiers, right, to teach them, learn healthy habits earlier in their career. Because unfortunately, I can't remember all the names. There were so many lovely stories, right? And I can't remember who said it. In being part of military, I tell my patients that, like, I get it. I get that sense of you can't complain, suck it up and go, have to make rank, have to deploy, right? So unfortunately, they wait until the end of their career to get things fixed, right? So after 20 years of things being broken, it takes time. And so since we are a specialty clinic, I love that because I feel bad for the PCMs. They have 15 minutes. I have an hour to 90 minutes. Let's go over everything. How are you feeling? What's your bandwidth? And I think Lisa Peterson, I didn't remember her name, operator syndrome, right? TBI, PTSD, behavioral health. One of the best things I learned at NICO is that Venn diagram, right, of TBI, sleep, behavioral health. We have to work on everything together in order to get the soldier back to functioning better, feeling better, feeling closer to where they were, back to their baseline. And I always say that we're really good at that. We're really good at helping the soldier in a whole body, fixing everything from A to Z to help them get back to where they were. So, sorry, long answer, but I'm one of the TBA coordinators.
Thank you.
So I'm the department chief at the Intrepid Spirit Center at Fort Belvoir with the ATMC Hospital. And so I'm a psychologist by training. I see patients in that capacity, but I'm also in charge of running the Intrepid Spirit Center. So the night goes up at Walter Reed. It's the first, it's the biggest. They have all the fun toys and imaging material, like everything. We're a little smaller, have much the same makeup of disciplines. We still use the integrated interdisciplinary model. We're really looking at the whole person there as well. We just don't have quite the same diagnostic capabilities. And so my job is to be the psychologist for my patients and also make sure that the Intrepid Spirit Center is running smoothly.
And I'm Chandler Rhodes again, and so I'm the Service Chief of Treatment and Rehabilitation in the Research Department at the NICO, and I don't even know what that means. It's a title. So basically, we help run research both at the NICO, as was mentioned, we're lucky to actually have a research department there. So we have a lot of investigators who are running their individual studies, and now that Captain Williams will talk a little bit about how we're transitioning into the Defense Intrepid Network, we're figuring out kind of what are the research priorities going to be across this network. Traditionally, we have a lot of researchers who, I'm a neuroscientist. I was trained to, look at the brain, figure out what network connections are wrong, what's going on. But that's one tiny little piece of a puzzle. I'll publish something, it'll go into a journal, I'll pat myself on the back, I'll add it to my CV. But then how does a patient benefit from that? And so I think a lot of what we're trying to do at the NICO is work more on implementation science and say, okay, if we can get the research to support these, non-traditional interventions for TBI or psychological health or moral injury, are there ways that we can easily develop that into a manual that we can then implement across all of our network sites so that patients can actually receive the care that they're looking for, but also make sure that our providers are trained in an appropriate way that they can administer that care. So that's kind of my goal for the Defense Intrepid Network and the research department going forward, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the specific research we're focused on.
I guess, I oftentimes think that everyone knows NICO, right? And I guess that's occupational hazard. I think the whole goal is, I want to talk a little bit about what we are and what we do. I know when I first passed by NICO in 2010, when the doors first opened, I passed by and I saw this flag raised, and it was a red, white, and blue flag, and it said NICO on it. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. So I walked in and asked, at the time it was Dr. Kelly was there, and I said, so what is that you guys do? And now, go full circle, 10 years later, I became the director of this organization. And I realized that it is a life-changing organization for the patients that they care for. There's no doubt about that. NICO started in 2010. We opened the doors in 2010, but it came out of a congressional mandate from 2007 to 2008 about the Department of Defense will understand TBI and behavioral health associated conditions. That was written into the NDA at the time. And so the Fisher family, so many of you who are military, who are around the military know the name the Fisher House, Arnold Fisher and others. So Arnold Fisher stood up and said, look, we're going to support this. And they actually developed a foundation called the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund. And that fund has funded 12 sites across the military health system for TBI. So NICO being the first, the second being Fort Belvoir, right down the street. And then the list goes on. We will be opening the doors of the last built Intrepid Spirit Center by the Fisher family in September of this year. So that will bring us to a total of 11, plus the Center for the Intrepid out of San Antonio, which would be the 12 that they've built. Now that one focuses on amputee care. All the rest of the Intrepid Spirit Centers and NICO focus on TBI and brain health. So the intent was, and that's when I came on board, was to, DHA said, we want to develop a network. And the network can't focus on just TBI. The reality is that we want to focus on brain health as a whole. And so transition from being a ill model to a wellness model, which is critically important. I think I heard others say that prior. And so the Defense Intrepid Network for TBI and brain health consists of 13 sites across the military health system, headquartered here in Bethesda at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in the National Capital Region. And so our goal, you'll see many new programs that are coming online, cognitive rehabilitation programs that are not tied directly to TBI. We have sleep programs. Dr. Wise is one of our leaders in sleep medicine here, and we comprehensive programs. And so when we first stood up the DEN, the Defense Intrepid Network, they said, what makes a DEN member? And it's not the name. It's not the name Intrepid. Yes, we all share that name. And by the way, the Intrepid comes from the USS Intrepid ship that's in New York Harbor. So if you ever get a chance to go to New York, go to the ship, and the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund office is on that ship. Strange. But that is the gender. That's kind of like one of those fun party facts that nobody cares about, but I like those facts. Right? And so the big deal is that it's not about the name. What it is about, though, is the model of care that we utilize. And so what we utilize, the interdisciplinary model of care, and there's nothing else in the world quite like it. Now, when I first got there, we did an environmental scan to look at who else around the world is doing what we do. There's about 5 other programs that simulate what we do, and 3 of those 5 started their program based on what we do. And they all acknowledged we came to NICO in 2013 and 2015. We liked it, and we said we're going to replicate that. But the challenge is not a model that is hugely lucrative financially, right? Because why? Because we spend time with patients. I think we sit down, and as Dr. Wise said, we spend the time with patients. We make sure that we understand them. And honestly, one of the most important parts of what we do is case management. And as we dwindle in case management, we also see the quality of care change as well. Okay, that is absolutely true. And so at our 13 sites, all of them utilize the interdisciplinary model. That means twice a week, providers come together and they talk about the patients in a good way. We talk about the patients, we understand what's going on. And by the time that patient sees that next provider, the provider's already had that dialogue. And so it's not treating that patient in isolation, but it's treating that patient in a unique way. And so that's really what makes us different. So hence the Defense Intrepid Network for TBI and brain health. And our goal is to get this model to be accepted by, as a standard of care. When you look at it, we are bringing later on this year, we'll be partnering with, again, More Commons Federation and Home Base out of Massachusetts up in Boston, the Avalon Center out of Colorado, Shepherd Center out of Atlanta, the Richmond VA, as well as the Tampa VA, as well as Palo Alto. So we're going to bring all those sites together because they replicate some degree of an interdisciplinary model. And we're going to talk about the strategy moving forward. Our goal is to get this to be a standard of care. But in order to be a standard of care, we have to be given the ability to have a difference in how we approach patient care. So that's going to be later on this year, and I think that's going to be the first step to really changing the game.
Thank you for that. And, You know, I was thinking when my husband was first diagnosed with TBI, I had no idea what TBI even stood for. So I would like you to actually tell the audience. I'm assuming the majority know nowadays, but yeah, so some maybe in the audience who have no idea what is TBI.
So that's actually a really good question. And we're going to talk about research. It's an exciting time for research in TBI. So TBI is a traumatic brain injury, can range anywhere from mild, moderate, severe. The reason it's so interesting is NIH is actually revamping and reclassifying because it's just too simple. Mild, moderate, severe, that encompasses a lot of things, right? Military members, subconcussive blasts, like, right, those and seals in the zodiac, back and forth, back and forth. There's so many things that classify. USIS is doing a very exciting study about studying that long-term, like that subconcussive blast, right? You have your Carl Gustav and you're firing it. Right now, the studies are saying that there's no long-term cognitive deficits, right? Those that work with operators know that's not true. But anyways, I think it is exciting. I am glad that the DoD and VAO does have our TBI classification system. Surprisingly, the civilian sector doesn't use that, which I find it really weird because whenever they come into the civilian ER, they're like, I think you have a TBI, right? So at least I'm glad we have the DoD VA criteria. But basically, right, a traumatic brain injury can be anything from a blast to a physical head injury, right? The coup, contra coup from a car accident. So it encompasses a very wide range of medical disorders, either physically or like blast pressure.
And I would tell you, recently we talked in front of Congress on just this topic here, blast pressure injuries that you see a lot of members. This is during training. You know, here's a fun fact, an unfortunate fun fact that, you know, the most common TBIs take place in the military. What do you think? You think on the battlefield? Nope, in training. And so the biggest challenge is they take place in training. So our goal is, can we protect the member so that they can get to the fight, right? And so one of the big things that Congress has been focused on for the last couple of years is how can we regulate that training environment? How can we change the paradigm of the training? And so those are critical facts that we have to understand. And so when we talk about TBI, we talk about concussions, right? And that's the term that we think about. You've had a concussion. The goal is to really and truly reclassify what it means to have a TBI, not just mild, moderate, and severe, because that tells you actually nothing about what part of the brain is affected. And that's one of the things we do at NICO that I'm proud to say, and across the network, our multi-site research. We're doing brain mapping now to really understand what part of the brain is affected, utilizing things such as the MEG, which is our magnetoencephalography, which is only about 40 of those in the country. And in 1 mile radius of Walter Reed, we have 2. And that's one at Walter Reed and then one at NIH across the street. And then you won't find another one for miles away. So it's pretty impressive research that we have, but that is our focus.
Wow. Dr. Bradley, I have a question for you. Currently, what behavioral health services are available to service members across the network? And how would you like to expand those services?
Sure. So all the sites offer medication and psychotherapy, evidence-based treatment for whether it's depression, PTSD, so EMDR, CPT, PE for any therapists in the audience, that this sort of standard gold treatments for PTSD. But we also have creative arts therapy. So most sites have some amount of either art therapists, music therapists, dance movement therapists to really augment what the therapist or the psychiatrist might be doing. I believe all sites have neuropsychology services as well to really get some objective measures about how a person's brain is functioning. Our site in particular has a rehab psychologist who has some of that extra training in helping a person to adjust after an injury. And so I would say that we are very fortunate that we have such a robust behavioral health team. I don't know that every Intrepid Spirit Center has the exact same makeup of behavioral health services, but I think ideally every site would have the access to some flavor of all of those things to really round out the behavioral health treatment, because I think, as has been mentioned, psychotherapy is great, but there is really a tremendous amount of benefit that can be added when you offer these additional therapies as well.
You know, like Dr. Brady said, there's a lot of what we've done is we've classified, we have 5 basic services, clinical services that we offer across the network. I mean, every site has to have these 5 basic services. That's behavioral health, medical services, rehabilitative services, integrative health services, where our spiritual, our massage, our art, music, dance therapy, our canine therapy, equine therapy fall into, and then we have our clinical support therapies services. So those are the 5 basic services we offer. To ensure standardization across the model, and that was the reason why DHA, Defense Health Agency, actually standardized or created the DEN, was to standardize the model. We wanted to make sure if you go to NICO, or if you go to Fort Belvoir, or if you go to Fort Cavazos, former Fort Hood, you're going to get the same dosing, you're going to get the same basic high quality care, and that's what we're focusing on and working towards. And so for psychotherapy, it can either be provided by a clinical licensed clinical social worker, or it can be provided by a clinical psychologist. And so the flavor is going to be a little different, but at the end of the day, the dosing and what they receive will be the same no matter what site they go to.
I'm going to catch you off guard with this question. So are the service members or veterans, are they able to choose the services as far as the art therapy, the music therapy?
So our site's a little different. We don't have an IOP model. We use a strictly outpatient model. And so each individual service member has their individualized treatment plan based off of what is going on for them, as well as what time they have to devote to coming to see medical. Because some people, if they're almost retired, may have a lot of time in their day, and others are really trying to keep their job at the Pentagon or wherever in this area. And so it's really very person specific. And so they can opt for behavioral health services or not if they don't want to, if they don't feel like they have the time. We do ask that everybody meet with behavioral health once, just to kind of give them some feedback on what could be gained by engaging with behavioral health. But I think what's different for our embedded behavioral health providers is the person's coming to our clinic for their head injury, their history of head injury. They're not coming specifically for behavioral health like they might to an outpatient behavioral health clinic. And so there's some variation in degree of readiness to engage. We've talked about the stigma, right? I think they are more willing in the model that we offer because it's seen as part of the entire treatment plan. We also do a fair amount of education, and we have a class on the impact on your brain and your body for stress. And so when you approach it in a very concrete, objective way, sometimes they're more receptive. We also do biofeedback with service members, and I think for people who are very concrete and like data, they like to see the changes in their physiology, and that might be done through occupational therapy and not with the psychologist, and so it feels different to come from them. But ultimately, we're still teaching them how to decrease that autonomic arousal, right? And so I think that the beauty of this model is that service members can really get the content from a variety of methods, whatever is going to work best for them.
Thank you for
And I
explaining.
think I'll add a little bit to that in terms of research. I think kind of our department chief of research at the NICO always says, research is a good way to get people engaged in behavioral health services who might not seek it otherwise. So kind of going back to the creative arts therapies, so I think one of the roles of research in the NICO and the Defense Intrepid Network is we do have all of these kind of non-traditional treatments. How do we evaluate those? How do you know which ones should we have at each site, or maybe we don't need that one? And so creative arts therapies, we've been very lucky to have a wonderful relationship with the National Endowment for the Arts, who's provided us with a lot of creative arts therapists across the network. So we have dance movement therapists, art therapists, as well as music therapists. And so through them, we've also been able to conduct some research studies. So we have ones looking at art therapy in relation to post-traumatic stress. We have some music therapy ones in relation to chronic pain. And kind of through that initial preliminary work, we were able to get a congressional allocation of $10 million for creative arts therapies research that we're in the process of executing. And so through that, I don't know if it's officially announced, but we have probably 9 studies total that will be kind of executed over the next 2 to 3 years that will look at moral injury using art therapy, mask making for moral injury. We're again looking at chronic pain, post-traumatic stress, and as part of that as well, we're also hoping to do an implementation study to kind of review, okay, what are the kind of facilitators and barriers to facilitating art therapy across the network, and figuring out kind of on a provider level what's going on, and also taking those measurements of utilization of these services. How can we improve that utilization? Are there super long wait times, or do we have an art therapist sitting somewhere in Alaska who's not really getting used? That's definitely not the case, but to evaluate those things that will also hope to kind of inform, what are the future clinical staffings for creative arts therapies across the network. And I think that can be a really good model that we can then take and kind of use in the different kind of non-traditional kind of services that we offer. So I think research has kind of a big role in supporting what is provided across the network, but it's also one of those things where I've always struggled with what does it mean to be evidence-based? I know there's lots of terms, but how much evidence do you need when you have all this wonderful anecdotal evidence? And I think that's kind of where, the psychedelic space is right now, and a lot of even the stellate ganglion block, there's wonderful anecdotal evidence, but what level of evidence do we need? And I think that's something we're still as a network figuring out, but hopefully we'll get answers soon.
That's great. Now, Captain Williams, I think this might be for you. How do you do you serve veterans and active duty military, and how does that work?
So that's a tough question, because by definition we are a readiness platform in the sense that we are focused on active duty, but we have space available for our veterans and others as well. So if they are beneficiaries of the military health system, then they have the ability to be referred to some of our sites. And if our sites have space available, then obviously we would see them in that case. So unique question. So some of our sites would say that we're active duty only. That is true. They're active duty only, but they do have space available. And so what I always say is that talk to your provider, and if there's space available, meaning that if providers or the system or IOP, and I want to back up a little bit and talk about the service in terms of the two major type of programs we have. So across the organization, we have what we call the intensive outpatient program. An intensive outpatient program, each site is a little different, but we have a 4-week program. Most sites have about 5 weeks, and then one site has 10 weeks, which is Fort Campbell. So Fort Campbell, Kentucky has a 10-week program because they work with, I think it's the 101, the 101st Airborne Division there. And their goal is to make sure those guys can continue to work in some degree while they continue to get treatment. Where our models at a lot of other sites are, your job is your treatment for those 4 weeks or 5 weeks. When this program first started up, we had to work with the operational units at the time, and if you can imagine, the op tempo during the war was really high, especially for the 101, especially for the 82nd, and for a lot of the special operators. So every location of an Intrepid Spirit Center is where there's a large troop concentration. That's why they're there. And so you look at in Camp Lejeune, you got MARSOC. If you look at Camp Pendleton, you got 1st MEF. If you look at each one of the units in Texas. So if you look at Fort Bliss, mechanized units. So all of them are large units that are at greatest risk for TBIs. And so the programs were tailored to support those units. And so our intensive outpatient program is what we did largely for the large part of most of our programs. And we bring patients in on the first day. We have a rolling program at NICO where every Tuesday we bring in a new cohort. We can bring up to 6 members every Tuesday in. And then we're still running our outpatient clinic as well. With outpatient, they get the same access to the same services, but they do it longitudinally over time. Whereas the intensive outpatient program, which is considered to be in a lot of ways the gold standard for the treatment of patients who have not responded to traditional care for TBI. And so we bring those patients in and they stay there for 4 weeks and they get evaluated, they start treatment, and then we package that up and send them back to their units. So at the end of the day, our goal is to support anyone who needs it. Obviously, our active duty members, because the military health system is their first, but if we have that space available, we definitely take care of veterans and others.
I did want to add to that because we do active duty veterans, also spouses. I know a lot of people have talked about access to care for veterans. I see patients all the way from Kentucky all the way to New York at West Point, and we do accommodate them. We'll work with them to try to get all of their services together. They'll have the initial point with me, assess their needs, and then have them come back for 2 to 3 days, try to get them into the Fisher House. So we are working because we do understand the needs for veterans in various parts of the East Coast. Unfortunately, we're not really doing West Coast, but from, all the way from like Kentucky to New York, we are trying to accommodate all services, all active duty veterans, and sometimes even spouses on space availability, right? Because they all need help. So we are trying to help everyone.
Wow. Are you partnered with the VA at all?
That's a tough question because, NICO itself, we're not partnered, but the Defense Health Agency is, right? And so the military health system partners with the VA because there's a transition to care, right? So our goal is to make sure that members aren't lost in the transition. And so there's LNOs, what we call liaison officers at DHA, Defense Health Agency, who are whose VA is put there on purpose to help understand the policies and how we can minimize the loss of transition. So the DOD and the VA, we put out our standardized policies together when it comes down to how we treat. And so all of those things are critical. So in that sense, yes, we do have a partnership. Our goal is to strengthen that partnership. We started an initiative several years ago called the Continuum of Caring and Healing Initiative, and we focus on the areas and gaps that we have in care. And so we know that the way the healthcare system, even in our country, is set up is it's an illness model, right? It's not a prevention model, right? So our goal is how can we work with our operational units that we know are at greatest risk, and how can we insert a lot of the things we do into their training? If you insert into their training, it's no longer seen as a stigmata of illness. It's seen as you're preparing them. And we see that as building what? Resilience, education, and prevention. Now, a couple of years ago, Congress came out with the Warfighter Brain Health Initiative. Congressional mandate, and DOD is moving forward with instituting or implementing that Warfighter Brain Health Initiative. And it focuses on how can we prevent, build resilience, and educate. When a member gets injured, I think we do a phenomenal job of caring for those injured members. At Walter Reed, we have an inpatient ward for TBI, and then we have all of the special services across the board. They come to us, we care for them, then they transition back to their units, oftentimes where they have less resources than they did before they started. And eventually they transition out. So our goal is to focus on how can we now start to work the pre and then start working the post. And the way we do that in post is working with our military support organizations, our veteran support organizations, understanding what resources are out there and start directing members to those sites. The benefit of and the power of what we do is the network. And that means that no matter where you are across the military health system, we make sure you get referred somewhere that they have the resources and the capability to support you as you transition through.
Thank you. Dr. Wise, would you mind discussing a little bit about TBI treatment in women?
Yes, that is something I get very passionate about, so I might use my hands and be animated. So kind of talking about, right, what is TBI? So 80% of TBI, civilian, military, is mild, right? When we think of concussion, we think of mild TBIs. 82, I think the exact number for the military was 82%. The problem is pretty much all of the research on TBI, preclinical, clinical, is based on male studies, right? Interesting enough, right? Went down this rabbit hole. Even in animal studies, pretty much all of the animals that are used are males. The fear is they do not want to use females for the fear that the hormone cycle system will skew the data, right? Current studies are showing that's not true. NIH has actually released a statement in 2015 to have them push towards equality in animal studies. USIS is actually, I'm very proud to say, I have a bunch of friends over at USIS and they're actually doing that. So if you're going to put in for an IRB for an animal study and you only want male, you have to justify why it can only be male, right? Why is that so important? The problem is the disparity between men and women, right? So civilian sector, military, men are more likely, twice as times as likely to get a head injury than women. Why is that? I'm sure some of you are not surprised. Men usually do a lot more kind of high-risk activities, the motorcycles, things like that. Also in the military, right, men are twice as likely, mostly because majority of the men are the ones usually on military deployments and more likely to be on the front line. Over the last 200 years, women have been in the military in some form or another, right? The numbers are increasing. 18.6% of women are officers in the military. 16.8% of women are enlisted. The numbers are growing. Yay, go women. Which is really sad why there's such a huge disparity between men and women in the research. We're kind of making changes, but regardless, the studies are showing that women have worse outcomes, more symptoms. Women, service members, veterans are grossly underrepresented in studies for active duty and veterans. What little we do have is showing that women have more neurobehavioral symptoms, higher levels of depression, and require more resources. The reason I find the one about depression, mental health, kind of really interesting, right? There was a pediatric study, kind of looked at across the board with everything, and it did show, right, that there's some things between men and women we can't get over, right? The gender biases, right? How a little girl should act, how a little boy should act, that implicit bias, right? As a personal story, in my lifetime, and no, I'm not that old, My mom was diagnosed. My mom was an Army veteran, and she was exposed to Agent Orange. She was diagnosed with hysterical woman disease, and then later was found out to have. Right, I see the women shaking their heads. I met a lot of lovely nurses, and there's so many amazing women in this audience. And yes, so my mom was diagnosed, I was 2 years old, and she was diagnosed with hysterical woman disease and later found out to be a multiple sclerosis from her exposure to Agent Orange, right? So as healthcare providers, we have to get over that implicit bias with that. The other things are the biomechanical, right? The differences of the muscular structures of the neck, the chemical, the social, right? Some of the studies are showing that the HPG axis, that dysfunction in our hormone system, hypothalamic, pituitary, gonadal system, that potentially that head injury, some initial studies are showing that that can suppress the estrogen and the progesterone, right? So that can be playing. So the question is we need to do more. We need to do more for women. But once again, how do we do that? University of Pittsburgh is actually doing a really good study on biomarkers for TBIs. That's really going to be the wave of the future. I was actually talking to Dr. Brody about how we can kind of look at it for ourselves, because it's the cis-tau that they're finding is a major component for the CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So trying to maybe do something with that with the special forces groups to see if we can kind of see these guys that have a higher level of the cis-tau, and that correlation to the CTE. But anyways, but we just have to do better for women. The other thing too is I think is a way forward for the future is looking at other healthcare disparities, not just gender, but like racial, sexual orientation. I think that is, I see a lot of women shaking their head. We're in the infancy with that. We don't even know anything about, let alone with women in research. We have to do better for women and for different disparities, that healthcare disparities, other disenfranchised populations.
You know, what Dr. Wise just explained, though, as we move forward with the new classification for TBI, biomarkers will be now part of that new classification, so as social determinants of health. And so we're going to look at not only biomarkers, but gender, but social aspects. All of that will be a part of the new classification and will help us determine prognosis and potentially outcomes. So.
Thank you. Dr. Rhodes, what are some examples of behavioral health research being conducted across the network?
And so I think we spoke a little bit about the research in creative arts therapies. I think one other study that I would really like to highlight that's not specific for women veterans, but we have partnered with the TBI Center of Excellence over the past probably 12 or 13 years now on the natural history study, and they have a caregiver arm. So for the past 12 or so years, they've been actually, surveying caregivers of service members who have had TBI, moderate, mild, severe, as well as more recently service members who have post-traumatic stress, and tracking the health outcomes of their spouse or their caregiver, whether that's a spouse or a child or a parent. And so that's been kind of a wonderful aspect. I know at the NICO, we do have kind of a family wellness program that does bring our spouses, if they are able to the NICO for the 4th week of the IOP so that they can also receive the education, do a little bit of time with their spouse in clinical care. But I think something that we've noticed since COVID especially, I think the ability of spouses to travel. Previously, we were able to provide childcare on base. That is no longer an option. So we have a lot of spouses who, again, once if your spouse is at NICO for 4 weeks, you have taken on the burden of the home. You want your spouse to get help, but then you're also potentially maybe a little bitter that they're there getting all the care you need and you're managing everything else. So I think we're really hoping to take the research that we've learned from this kind of longitudinal research study and incorporate that in kind of improvements in this family wellness program to, again, figure out, is there a way that we can improve the support that we give the spouses and the caregivers as well. And so I think as Dr. Weiss was saying as well, I think for the NICO, historically, our research has mainly been focused on men. I think our population, especially with our IOP coming from special forces, a lot of them come towards the end of retirement. So these are people who've been in special forces for the past 20 years. They're mainly male. But I think one of the hopes of having this Defense Intrepid network is it kind of makes it a little easier for us to do multi-site research. And so again, if we have a larger kind of total population for our research, we'll have more women and hopefully be able to start teasing out some of those gender-specific biomarkers or disparities, but with single site studies, when you have an N of 100 and we have five women in there, we don't really statistically have the ability to really say anything with any kind of validity behind it. But the hope is that kind of in the future, I think it is, again, something, and hopefully I'll sneak my way into those research discussions to make sure that we start incorporating more kind of gender-focused research.
Thank you. Captain, we're running out of time, so I'd really like you to talk just a little bit about where do you see NICO in the next 5 to 10 years, and then I'll just let you finish up.
Thank you for the opportunity. I guess that's the question I always ask new employees: where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And so I guess you just gave me that back. You know, the Defense Intrepid Network is a global leader in TBI and brain health. Full stop. That is what we are. That's what we have been, and I want to see us continue to be that. I see this organization. When I say this organization, I mean the military health system. When it comes down specifically for TBI and brain health, still in 5 years from now, leading the effort. I think that we would have, broken the ceiling on this becoming a standard of care for TBI that is not responsive to traditional primary care treatment. I see this organization growing into more and more sites. I see the model of care becoming the standard of care, though, even in primary care and in some other sites. So I think NICO will continue to be that leader. I think NICO will continue to create and grow phenomenal scientists, phenomenal people who really and truly lead the industry. But not only that, though, I see our alumni network, our personnel, the people who have come through NICO really and truly be stewards of what we do. They already are. Oftentimes we get questioned about, show me your data, show me your productivity. And there's a difference between qualitative and quantitative data. That's the reality. And unfortunately, we count numbers all the time, and that is a reality of life. Don't get me wrong. As I always say, I still need to see the numbers, but I also want to hear the qualitative data, because that's what changes lives. And so when I get stopped in the hallway by a member and say, this program changed my life, I have never had care like this ever. It almost brings tears to my eyes, because and these people are saying that, I was on the brink of suicide and some other things, but you guys cared. And it was simple things that made a difference. It's someone who took the time to listen and to actually follow up. And so things like when you call the patient before the actual appointment, it blows patients away to go, why are you calling me before the actual appointment? Or when you get there and the person's needs and issues are already being addressed before they even have to say it. When you sit in a room with a neurologist and an internist or all these other specialists in the room, and they're all focused on that one patient, that changes lives. So I see NICO continuing to be that. I see the Defense Intrepid Network continuing to be the leader in this, and I see the work that we do continuing to change lives every single day.
I'm not going to get mushy, but I could actually feel those tears, because I remember 17 years ago, we would never have been sitting in a room like this. And so we're all really blessed to be in a atmosphere such as this. And thank you so much for serving our veterans and the military community. We definitely need it. It's an ongoing need. It's not something that's going away. This is extremely important. It doesn't just affect the veteran either, or the active duty, but it affects the family members, the children, the grandchildren. So thank you.
I'm glad I was a clinician, because some of the lingo you guys used, I can just say. But wow, I am better for this afternoon. This was amazing. The conversation is just beginning. And that's really what I'm taking away from this. But without further ado, I'd like to invite Her Royal Highness Princess Marie from Denmark to join me. I'm going to bring a microphone to you. And I do want a photo op because I want you with the Military Women's Memorial. But no, we'll be fine. No, ma'am. I'm going to come stand with you. Come on.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Phyllis, really, and the whole team here at the Women's Memorial. It's been very inspiring for me. Thank you for including me. Thank you for sharing your stories. I was very moved by your stories. I've always been, I have a lot of respect and admiration for all those who serve and their families. I think it's so important that we are together like this and talk about the issues. All the veterans are paving the way for the women who serve today, and it's very important that we also get the psychological help and support before being deployed, because it's, and also the families need to be included in that so they know what they will face. So yeah, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for giving back to your community. Thank you for speaking out, because this really makes a huge difference. And thank you again for including me in this session. Thank you, Phyllis, and I need to give you a hug after your story because I was very moved. Yeah. I've always been very sensitive, but thank you so much. Thank you for everyone.
So again, please do stop by the tables out there, braininjuryservices.org, Wounded Warrior Project, the Stephen A. Cohen Military Clinic at Easter Seals, Community Building Artworks. They have been a great partner with us, and let me tell you, I never truly recognized how important art therapy truly is for changing us. Not only heart health is important, brain health is important, and art therapy can really have an impact on all of these. Another organization, We the Billions, the Global Council on Brain Health, a collaboration with AARP, the Barry Robinson Center, Face the Fight, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is here, Boulder Crest Foundation, and the VA Office of Connected Care. So I want to quickly remind everybody, the garage parking is open until 8:30. It is 6:08, so you have over 2 hours. The reception is now on. We'll light the smoking lamp, I suppose. Thank you for being here with us today.